The medical bay of the research station Kepler-7 hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced alien technology. Dr. Zara Kelleth lay motionless on the bio-bed, her azure skin pale against the white sheets. The vertebral damage from the mining accident had been catastrophic. 3 of her spinal segments had been crushed when the support beam collapsed, and the neural pathways that controlled her lower limbs were severed completely. The Altarian medical team had done everything they could. Chief Medical Officer Vextar had run every scan, tried every regenerative protocol known to their species. The prognosis was final and devastating. Zara would never walk again. For an Altarian, whose culture revolved around physical prowess and mobility, this was more than a disability. It was a death sentence to everything she had ever known. Zara stared at the ceiling, her large violet eyes reflecting an emptiness that went beyond physical pain. She had been the lead xenogeologist for the mining expedition on Kepler-7, a woman who had scaled the crystal cliffs of her homeworld and navigated the treacherous cave systems of a dozen different planets. Now she couldn't even feel her legs. The research station itself was a marvel of interspecies cooperation, housing scientists from 7 different worlds. Humans were the newest addition to the Galactic Research Consortium, having joined only 5 years earlier. Most species viewed them with a mixture of curiosity and mild condescension. They were young, aggressive, and prone to reckless behavior. Their technology was primitive compared to the elegant solutions developed by older civilizations. Dr. Marcus Chen had arrived on Kepler-7 3 weeks ago as part of the human contingent. He was a neurosurgeon and biomedical engineer, though his credentials seemed laughably inadequate compared to the advanced medical degrees held by the other species. While Altarians had been practicing medicine for over 10,000 years, humans had barely discovered antibiotics 2 centuries ago. Marcus had heard about Zara's accident through the station gossip network. The other doctors spoke of it in hushed tones, expressing sympathy while acknowledging the hopelessness of the situation. Spinal cord injuries were simply beyond repair, even with their advanced technology. The neural pathways, once severed, could not be restored. But Marcus couldn't accept that finality. It went against every instinct he had as both a doctor and a human being. He had spent sleepless nights studying Altarian physiology, cross-referencing it with human neurological research. There were differences, certainly, but the basic principles of neural function were remarkably similar across species. The breakthrough came when Marcus was reviewing old human medical journals, research that had been dismissed by the galactic medical community as primitive. He found studies on neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and form new neural connections. While other species had focused on direct repair of damaged tissue, humans had discovered that the nervous system could be trained to find alternate pathways. It was a radical concept. Instead of trying to fix what was broken, they would teach the brain to work around the damage. Combined with experimental stimulation techniques and targeted physical therapy, there was a possibility of restoring function. It would be difficult, painful, and uncertain, but it was hope where none had existed before. Marcus made his decision. He would approach Zara with his theory, even though it would likely be met with skepticism from the medical establishment. He knew that other doctors would view his ideas as the desperate fantasies of an inexperienced human. But he also knew that Zara was facing a future that she considered worse than death. The next morning, Marcus entered the medical bay during the quiet hours before the day shift began. Zara was awake, as she had been most nights since the accident. Sleep brought dreams of running and climbing, which made waking even more cruel. "Dr. Kelleth," Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle her, "I'm Dr. Chen. I wondered if we might talk." Zara turned her head toward him, studying his features. Humans always looked so young to her, their faces unlined by the centuries that marked Altarian maturity. This one had kind eyes, though, and there was something in his expression that wasn't pity. "If you're here to offer counseling or psychological support," Zara said, her voice flat, "I'm not interested. I've heard enough about acceptance and adaptation." Marcus pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down. "Actually, I wanted to discuss your medical case. I've been studying your scans and the treatment protocols that have been attempted." Zara's expression didn't change. "Then you know that there's nothing more to be done. The neural pathways are severed. Even with our most advanced regenerative technology, there's no way to repair that kind of damage." "What if we didn't need to repair it?" Marcus asked quietly. For the first time since he had entered, Zara looked directly at him. "Explain." Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on the intensity of someone who had discovered something significant. "Human research has shown that the nervous system has an incredible capacity for adaptation. When direct pathways are damaged, the brain can develop alternate routes. It requires specific stimulation and training, but we've seen remarkable recoveries in cases that were considered hopeless." Zara was quiet for a long moment. "Your species has only been practicing medicine for a few centuries. Our doctors have assured me that my case is beyond treatment." "Your doctors are trying to fix a broken road," Marcus said. "I'm suggesting we build a new one." The metaphor hung in the air between them. Zara had spent her career as a geologist, understanding how water could carve new channels through solid rock given enough time and pressure. Could the same principle apply to neural pathways? "Even if such a thing were possible," Zara said slowly, "it would be experimental. Dangerous. The other doctors would never approve it." Marcus nodded. "They wouldn't. This would have to be something you chose to pursue, knowing the risks. There are no guarantees, and the process would be physically and mentally demanding." Zara closed her eyes, considering. The alternative was to return to her homeworld as an invalid, dependent on others for the rest of her life. In Altarian society, such an existence was considered a burden on the community. Many in her situation chose voluntary euthanasia rather than face such a future. "What would this treatment involve?" she asked finally. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but kept his voice calm and professional. "First, we would need to map your existing neural networks using techniques that combine human and Altarian technology. Then we would begin targeted stimulation of dormant pathways while engaging in intensive physical therapy designed to encourage new connections." "How long would this take?" "Months, possibly longer. And there would be no way to predict the outcome until we were well into the process." Zara was quiet again, staring at the ceiling. Marcus waited, understanding that this decision would reshape the course of her life regardless of which choice she made. "Dr. Chen," she said finally, "why are you willing to risk your career on an unproven treatment for someone you barely know?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because giving up isn't in my nature, and because everyone deserves a chance to fight for their life." The simple honesty of the statement struck Zara deeply. She had expected elaborate explanations about medical curiosity or professional ambition. Instead, she found something much more powerful: genuine compassion combined with an unwillingness to accept defeat. "When would we begin?" she asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the room. "As soon as you're ready." Outside the medical bay, the research station continued its work, oblivious to the conversation that had just taken place. Scientists from across the galaxy pursued their various projects, confident in the established boundaries of their knowledge. None of them suspected that a young human doctor and a paralyzed Altarian geologist were about to challenge everything they thought they knew about the limits of medical science. The real work was just beginning, and the path ahead would test both of them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. 3 weeks into the experimental treatment, Dr. Marcus Chen found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about medicine. The neural mapping process had revealed damage even more extensive than the original scans had shown. Zara's spinal cord hadn't just been severed. It had been crushed at multiple points, creating a complex web of damaged tissue that defied conventional repair. Yet something remarkable was happening. The daily stimulation sessions, combined with Marcus's adapted human rehabilitation techniques, were producing subtle but measurable changes in Zara's neural activity. The monitoring equipment showed faint electrical impulses traveling through pathways that shouldn't have been functional. Zara gritted her teeth as Marcus adjusted the neural stimulation device attached to her lower spine. The treatment was unlike anything the Altarian medical community had ever attempted. Instead of the gentle, non-invasive techniques preferred by her species, Marcus employed an aggressive combination of electrical stimulation, targeted pressure, and what he called forced neural activation. "The discomfort will increase as we progress," Marcus warned, monitoring the readouts on his hybrid human-Altarian equipment. "We're essentially forcing your nervous system to rebuild itself." "That doesn't happen without resistance." Zara nodded, sweat beading on her azure skin despite the climate-controlled environment. The pain was becoming a constant companion, but it was different from the helpless numbness she had experienced after the accident. This pain meant something was happening, that her body was fighting to reconnect with itself. Dr. Vex's Tar, the station's chief medical officer, entered the makeshift treatment room with obvious disapproval written across his reptilian features. He had been vocal about his concerns regarding Marcus's methods, calling them barbarically primitive and potentially dangerous to the patient's remaining neural function. "Dr. Chen," Vextar said in his characteristic hissing tone, "I must again express my concerns about this experiment. The patient's neural stress indicators are approaching dangerous levels." Marcus didn't look up from his equipment. "Dr. Kelleth's stress levels are within acceptable parameters for this type of neurological reconstruction. Human medicine has demonstrated that significant recovery often requires pushing the system beyond its comfort zone." "Human medicine," Vextar replied with barely concealed contempt, "has existed for a fraction of the time that Altarian medical science has been perfected. Your species still uses crude interventions that more advanced civilizations abandoned millennia ago." Zara spoke up from the treatment table, her voice strained but determined. "Dr. Vextar, with respect, your perfected medicine told me I would never walk again. Dr. Chen is offering me the possibility of proving that wrong." The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus knew that his methods were being viewed with suspicion not just by Vextar, but by the entire medical staff. Humans were seen as the newcomers, the species whose technology and techniques were considered crude by galactic standards. The idea that they might have insights that eluded more advanced civilizations was almost unthinkable. "Show him the neural pathway reconstruction," Zara said quietly. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then activated the holographic display that showed Zara's current neural mapping. The three-dimensional image revealed her nervous system in stunning detail, with new pathways highlighted in blue where the original connections had been severed. Vexitar's expression shifted from skepticism to bewilderment as he studied the display. "This is unexpected. These pathways shouldn't exist." "They didn't 3 weeks ago," Marcus explained. "The human understanding of neuroplasticity suggests that the nervous system can develop alternative routes when the primary pathways are damaged. We're not repairing the original connections. We're encouraging the development of entirely new ones." The Altarian doctor moved closer to the display, his scientific curiosity overcoming his professional pride. "The complexity of these new neural networks is extraordinary. How did you know this was possible?" Marcus powered down the stimulation device and helped Zara into a sitting position. Human medical history is filled with cases of remarkable recovery from neurological trauma. We've learned that the nervous system is far more adaptable than most species believe. What you call crude intervention is actually precise manipulation of the body's natural healing and adaptation mechanisms. Over the following days, word of the treatment spread throughout the research station. Scientists from various species began requesting access to observe the sessions, their skepticism gradually giving way to fascination as the results became undeniable. Dr. Timel, a renowned cerulean neurologist, arrived from the core worlds specifically to study Marcus's techniques. She had initially dismissed human medicine as primitive, but the neural scans from Zara's treatment forced her to reconsider her assumptions. Your approach contradicts everything we understand about neural recovery, Thymol admitted during one of the observation sessions. Yet the evidence is irrefutable. How did your species discover these principles? Marcus paused in his calibration of the treatment equipment. I think it comes from our perspective on injury and recovery. Most galactic civilizations have reached a point where serious trauma can be prevented or easily repaired. Humans have had to develop methods for dealing with damage that can't be simply fixed. We've learned to work with the body's natural resilience rather than trying to override it. Zara had been listening to the conversation while undergoing the latest round of stimulation therapy. There's something else, she said, her voice thoughtful. Dr. Chen never accepted that my condition was permanent. Every other doctor I spoke with presented my paralysis as a fact to be accepted. He presented it as a problem to be solved. The distinction was subtle but profound. The galactic medical community, with all its advanced technology and accumulated wisdom, had become focused on managing conditions rather than overcoming them. Human medicine, born from necessity and desperation, maintained a fundamental belief that the impossible was merely difficult. As the weeks progressed, the changes in Zara's condition became impossible to ignore. The neural stimulation sessions were producing measurable improvement in nerve conduction. Her legs, which had been completely unresponsive since the accident, began showing faint muscle contractions during electrical stimulation. The breakthrough came during the 8th week of treatment. Marcus was conducting a routine nerve response test when Zara suddenly gasped. Both of them stared at her right foot, which had moved slightly in response to her conscious effort. "Did you see that?" Zara whispered, afraid that acknowledging the movement might make it disappear. Marcus quickly activated the monitoring equipment, his hands shaking slightly with excitement. "Try again. Focus on moving your toes." Zara concentrated intensely, her face flushed with effort. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her toes flexed. The movement was minimal, barely visible, but it represented a victory over supposedly immutable biological laws. "The neural pathways are responding," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. "The new connections are becoming functional." Tears streamed down Zara's face as she managed to move her foot again. The motion was weak and uncoordinated, but it was voluntary movement where none should have been possible. After months of being told that such recovery was impossible, she was proving the limitations of established medical knowledge wrong. Dr. Vexitar, who had been observing the session, stood in stunned silence. His entire understanding of neurological medicine had been challenged by a human doctor using techniques that his advanced civilization had never considered. "This shouldn't be possible," he said quietly. "Our medical texts, our research, everything we know about spinal cord injuries indicates that this level of recovery is impossible." Marcus helped Zara through a series of movement exercises, each small motion a triumph over the supposedly unchangeable reality of her condition. "Maybe the problem isn't with what's possible," he suggested. "Maybe the problem is with our assumptions about what's impossible." The implications of Zara's recovery extended far beyond her individual case. If human techniques could restore function to severely damaged neural systems, it would revolutionize medical treatment across the galaxy. More importantly, it would challenge the fundamental assumptions that limited what doctors thought they could achieve. As word of the breakthrough spread throughout the research station and beyond, Marcus found himself at the center of a medical revolution he had never intended to start. He had simply refused to accept that a brilliant scientist should be condemned to a life of paralysis because conventional medicine had reached its limits. Zara's journey was far from over, but she had already proven something that would reshape medical science across the galaxy. The human refusal to accept defeat could overcome limitations that more advanced civilizations had never thought to question. 6 months after Dr. Marcus Chen had first approached her with an impossible proposition, Dr. Zara Kelleth stood in the main corridor of Research Station Kepler-7. The simple act of standing upright without assistance was a miracle that defied everything the galactic medical community had believed about spinal cord injuries. Her steps were still uncertain, requiring careful concentration and the support of a mobility frame, but she was walking. Each movement was a victory over the prognosis that had condemned her to permanent paralysis. The neural pathways that Marcus had helped her develop had grown stronger and more coordinated with each passing week. The transformation hadn't been limited to her physical recovery. The research station itself had become a center of medical pilgrimage, with doctors and scientists arriving from across the galaxy to study the revolutionary treatment protocols that Marcus had developed. What had started as an act of compassion for one paralyzed scientist had evolved into a fundamental challenge to established medical doctrine. Dr. Thymel stood with Marcus in the observation deck, watching Zara complete her daily mobility exercises. The cerulean neurologist had spent the past 3 months documenting every aspect of the treatment, and her findings were reshaping her understanding of neural recovery. The implications of this case extend far beyond individual treatment, Thymel said, her crystalline features reflecting deep contemplation. If human neuroplasticity principles can be applied to other species, we're looking at a complete revolution in how we approach neurological medicine. Marcus nodded, though his attention remained focused on Zara's progress. She was attempting to navigate a complex obstacle course that would challenge even someone with fully functional mobility. Her determination had become legendary among the station staff, inspiring researchers who had never considered the possibility of overcoming supposedly permanent disabilities. The technique isn't just about the medical protocols, Marcus explained. It's about approaching the problem with a different mindset. Most galactic medicine focuses on managing conditions. Human medicine developed from the necessity of overcoming them. The success of Zara's treatment had attracted attention from the highest levels of the Galactic Medical Council. Dr. Zarion, the Council's most senior representative, had arrived on Kepler-7 with a delegation of specialists to evaluate the human treatment methods. His presence represented both validation and skepticism from the established medical hierarchy. Zarion was an ancient being, even by the standards of his long-lived species. He had overseen medical advances across the galaxy for centuries and was known for his resistance to unproven techniques. The idea that a young human doctor could revolutionize neurological treatment was something he found difficult to accept. Dr. Chen, Zarion said as he approached the observation area, "I must admit that the patient's recovery is remarkable. However, I remain concerned about the aggressive nature of your treatment protocols. The stress levels you subject patients to would be considered harmful by most medical standards." Marcus turned to face the council representative, maintaining his respectful demeanor despite the implied criticism. "Dr. Zarion, I understand your concerns, but we've learned that recovery often requires pushing the system beyond its comfort zone. The human body, and apparently other species as well, has remarkable capacity for adaptation when properly challenged." "Properly challenged or dangerously stressed," Zarion countered. "Your methods involve levels of neural stimulation and physical demands that could potentially cause additional damage." Before Marcus could respond, Zara herself approached the group. Her movement was still deliberate and required focus, but she moved with increasing confidence. The transformation from the broken woman who had been certain she would never stand again was complete and undeniable. "Dr. Xerion," Zara said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had experienced both despair and recovery. "I understand your concerns about Dr. Chen's methods. 3 months ago, I would have agreed with you. The treatment was painful, demanding, and unlike anything in conventional Altarian medicine." She paused, looking directly at the council representative. "But conventional medicine told me I would spend the rest of my life unable to walk. Dr. Chen told me that limitation was something to be overcome, not accepted. The choice between comfort and recovery was mine to make." Xerion studied Zara carefully, his ancient eyes taking in every detail of her posture and movement. "And you believe the risks were justified?" "I believe that giving up without trying everything possible is the greatest risk of all," Zara replied firmly. "Dr. Chen didn't just treat my injury. He treated my assumption that the injury had to define my future." The philosophical implications of her statement weren't lost on anyone present. Human medicine wasn't just offering new techniques, it was challenging the fundamental assumptions about what was possible in medical treatment. Dr. Vextar, who had initially opposed the experimental treatment, approached the group with a data tablet containing the latest neural scans. His opposition had gradually transformed into grudging admiration as the results became undeniable. "The latest scans show continued improvement in neural pathway development," Vextar reported. "The new connections are not only functional, but are continuing to strengthen. At this rate of progress, Dr. Kelleth may achieve near-normal mobility within the next few months." The revelation sent a ripple of excitement through the gathered medical professionals. Recovery wasn't just possible, it was accelerating beyond even Marcus's most optimistic projections. "How is this level of improvement sustainable?" asked Dr. Thymel. "Conventional understanding suggests that neural regeneration should plateau much earlier in the process." Marcus had been puzzling over the same question. "I think it's related to the interconnected nature of the treatment. We're not just stimulating individual pathways, we're encouraging the entire nervous system to reorganize itself. Each new connection makes additional connections more likely." Over the following weeks, Zara's recovery became the focus of intensive study. Medical researchers documented every aspect of her progress, developing protocols that could be adapted for other species and other types of neurological damage. The human approach to medicine was being integrated into galactic medical practice for the first time. The breakthrough came when Zara successfully completed a complex geological survey that required her to navigate challenging terrain. Her movement was fluid and confident, showing no signs of the catastrophic injuries that had once left her paralyzed. She had not only recovered her mobility, she had reclaimed her identity as an active scientist. Standing at the edge of a crystal formation that she had once thought she would never be able to explore again, Zara felt a profound sense of gratitude for the human doctor who had refused to accept the impossible. Marcus's stubborn determination to challenge medical limitations had given her back her life. The impact of her recovery extended far beyond personal triumph. Medical schools across the galaxy began incorporating human neuroplasticity principles into their curricula. The aggressive rehabilitation techniques that had once been dismissed as primitive were now recognized as sophisticated applications of biological adaptation principles. Marcus found himself at the center of a medical revolution that was transforming how the galaxy approached recovery and healing. What had started as compassion for one injured scientist had become a fundamental shift in medical philosophy. As Zara stood confidently on the crystal outcropping, collecting geological samples with the same skill and enthusiasm she had possessed before her accident, she represented something more than individual recovery. She was living proof that the human refusal to accept defeat could overcome limitations that more advanced civilizations had never thought to question. The off-world female who had been certain she would never stand again was not just standing, she was climbing, exploring, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And in doing so, she was helping to redefine the limits of medical science across the galaxy. Marcus watched from the research station, knowing that their work together had accomplished something more significant than restoring mobility to one person. They had restored hope to countless others who had been told their conditions were beyond treatment. The human belief that every problem had a solution, no matter how difficult, had found its place in the broader galactic community. The future of medicine would never be the same. And it all began with one doctor's refusal to accept that a brilliant scientist should be condemned to a life without the movement that defined her very existence.